Hey, in this video I'm going to show you how I filmed my cinematic car commercial. I will show you all the gear used, how I did my car setup, how I filmed all that, and how I did the sound recording and sound design, and also going to give you some insight on my post-production workflow. My name is Michael Ziganek and welcome to Cinema Production. So, what is the gear used for this video? I'm shooting on a Canon EOS R5 in 4K. Most of the scenes I shot in 24 frames, other scenes in 60 frames per second. I'm shooting in 4K, DCI, so it's the full resolution of the sensor, and I'm also recording that in HQ quality, which gives me the best result for the 4K shoot. In terms of the lenses, I'm using three different ones. For the wide angle shots, I use the Sigma 24-35. That's a 2.0 speed. For the regular shots, I have my Sigma 50mm, which is a 1.4. For the close-up shots, I'm using the 105mm macro lens from Sigma, which is a 2.8. In terms of filters, I decided to use the Freewell Variable ND filter, and for this video I wanted to have a little bit of a dreamy look, and I went for the Mist Edition. Since I'm shooting only in the afternoon or in sunset, I'm using the 2 to 5 stop filter for that. For the camera, I'm using the SmallRig camera cage and some other accessories from SmallRig. And I also have the extended base plate always mounted to my camera. This basically secures my RF to EF adapter and also acts as a base plate for the DJI RS2, and I don't need to remove the plate. And the good thing is I also can use that for my Manfrotto tripod mount, which has the same form factor, and I can just plug in without removing the plate. I'm using the DJI RS2 Gimbal. This is used in two situations. One is the handheld situation where I have a hand grip and the monitor attached to it. And this also mounts to the Hydra Alien Car Mount system, which basically has the base plate for the RS2, which you can plug directly in and also power through that. The monitor I'm using is the Freewell LUT 6. That's a 6-inch monitor. It's really bright. It has an HDMI input, and I can load all my custom LUTs into that, so I can see the preview of the image in the monitor while I'm using the Log 3 profile in my Canon. When it comes to the car mount, I decided to get the Tilta Hydra Alien Car Mount, and in the next section I give you some more infos about how to attach it and how I use the setup in actually filming the car. Additionally, I used a slider for one of my special effect shots. I'm using the Zeapon Micro 2 E600 slider. That's a motorized slider, and I have been using that with the app to control the motion, so I can repeat that shot 3 times, which I needed for my special effect shot, and this motorized slider was just perfect for doing that. Coming to the audio recording is done using my Zoom F6 field recorder. That's actually a 6-channel field recorder which can record in floating point, and this gives me a big advantage of not to care about the levels while recording, and you can basically adjust that in post and get your levels right to the point where you need it. Microphone, I'm using the Rode VideoMic Pro Plus. That's a really good mic I'm using for point and shoot. And I also have been using that for recording some of my sound effects. And I'm also using the Rode Wireless Go 2 setup, which I will show you later in my car recording setup, to attach a wireless transmitter using lavalier mics. And with this setup I was able to do all the recording with multiple channels. So coming to the car setup, my first tests were filming out of the trunk and handheld gimbal. It worked, but I really didn't like that, especially when you want to go a little bit faster. filming out of the trunk of a driving car, hanging out until almost you hit the road, isn't a good idea. Therefore I decided to purchase a car mount for my setup, and I went for the Tilta Hydra Alien Car Mount. And as you can see here, I'm mounting that on the back end side of my car on top of the trunk. It's quite an easy setup, and within minutes you are able to mount that on all different locations. There are 3 suction cups, 2 small ones, a big one. With that and this variable aluminum frame, it's quite easy to adapt for any different kind of shooting situation. I had to do some modifications to the arm mount where it actually connects to my DJI RS2, because originally it comes with this stiff setup, and I noticed that there's a lot of movement still transitioning from the car to the car mount, especially on the axis of the car when it rolls, and it gave me unpleasant shakes in the setup. So I decided to modify this mount. What you can see here, I have added a setup with 4 springs, which gives me a better setup for this scenario where the actual transitions of the movement from the car is not going into the camera mount on top. Because the gimbal isn't able to absorb that. The gimbal only works in the 3 axis, but this rolling situation in the car, this is not being absorbed by that. And adding the springs to the setup gave me really good results, because before that I could fix it in post, but all the movements caused then some motion blur, and after you have stabilized that, this motion blur was visible in the scene, and I didn't like that. So therefore I optimized the head, and with that the result is almost perfect even without stabilization. On the DJI RS2 I'm using the Raven Eye system. That's the wireless transmission system to get the video feed from the HDMI output of the camera to the Raven Eye, and then transmit via wireless to my mobile phone. And with this setup I'm able to control the gimbal, see the video feed, and also use active track as part of the navigation of the camera while I'm driving. The problem with the Raven Eye I encountered is that the wireless signal isn't strong enough, so I had to use an extender on top of the setup, as you can see here, which gives me a little bit more range, just enough that the signal is strong enough if I'm sitting in front of the car navigating the controls. So overall, the setup is quite easy to control. I'm using my iPhone here, where I can see the live feed. I can control the camera, I can control shutter speed and ISO, and I'm also able to have a joystick control to navigate the 2 axes of the gimbal. And in addition, I'm also able to use active track, where I can select actually an object, and the camera system with the DJI is tracking itself by using the feed and detecting the signal on the iPhone. Controlling the setup from in front of the car, that was something I had to learn, because it's not that easy to handle that while the car is driving. But after some practice I got it really under control, and I was able to control the camera to keep my subject, the car, in frame, and also apply the rotations on the gimbal setup for filming the sequence. Most of the time I used my 24 to 35mm lens. I also did a setup with my 50mm on some close-up shots, but the majority of the shots were filmed in 24mm or 35mm. When it comes to actual shooting, I had to learn a few new skills, especially when you actually need to coordinate 2 driving cars with 2 drivers, with a remote control setup of your camera, keeping the subject in frame, looking at the position of the 2 cars. So this was actually quite a challenge for me, and I learned a lot during this process. Beside that, we're living here in Germany, and this year summer is really bad, so I had a lot of days where it was rainy, and I wanted to have, a nice sunset with a good light, and of course no wet streets. And I had to wait actually a few weeks before I had another chance to shoot, since I'm not able to shoot every day. Finally, I managed to get all the shots I needed with the car setup using the Tilta Hydra. And all the other shots were done using either my gimbal setup, using the DJI RS2, or with a tripod. And I also used the Zeapon Micro 2 slider, especially for my VFX shot of the appearing car, since I needed to reproduce 3 different shots with the same motion, and that's only possible using a motorized slider. When it comes to sound, the first thing I always do is select the music I want for my video. I'm using Epidemic Sound for that, and the good thing there is when I found the soundtrack and I download it, it comes actually separated with the different channels. So I get actually the different tracks in separation, which makes it much easier to edit and adjust to my needs, instead of having a single file where everything is already baked in. Then I'm starting to plan the shots I have imagined to fit to that music. Of course, it would be better to have actually someone to compose the music, but we all have to work with stock footage, so therefore I do it that way. The sound recording in the car was the next thing to master. I decided to record the audio in the car. I placed my Rode Wireless 2 Go in the back of the car by placing a lavalier microphone close to the exhaust. The second microphone I mounted behind the side mirror to get also the sound outside of the car. And the third microphone was placed inside the car. This was a VideoMic Pro from Rode. All of that was connected to the Zoom F6 recorder to record all the 3 tracks in floating point. And this gives me actually the ability to do the level adjustments in post and not care about the level while I'm recording. I'm also using stock audio for ambient sound, for special effects sounds which I don't have right now, which are easy to get. So for that I'm using Epidemic Sound to get my stock audio and also place that into my project to complete the audio design. Let's have a look at the project itself. I have open here a Premiere Pro project. As you can see, I have here my main composition running in 23.976 frames per second, and I'm working in a resolution 3840 by 2160. I tried to organize my project as good as possible to keep it clean and tidy so I can find all the stuff. So basically what you can see here, I have all my videos. Most of them are recorded in 24 frames and some of them are recorded in 60 frames. And since I'm working here with my R5 output, I need to have a proxy. Otherwise, the performance is way too slow to edit it here. So as you can see here, I have attached all the proxies. So that's the typical workflow. I do import the videos, I create the proxies, I attach them, and then I also have to make sure to have the proxies enabled here so you can actually work on the faster clips to improve the workflow. Beside that, I have my typical assets and adjustment layers. So I'm using a CinemaScope bar at 4K. That's basically it. I have the music tracks downloaded from Epidemic Sound. That's the music I have selected, and as I said, it comes in different tracks for the different instruments. This makes it quite easy to edit in the timeline. And then I have just collected up my nested sequences, and up here I have my After Effects linked sequences all together, and also the pre-rendered versions of it, because when you work with After Effects integration, it's a good practice once you're done, you render and replace, which will actually improve the export of your Premiere Pro quite a bit. And sometimes I also had errors exporting, but if you do actually render and replace the After Effects linked sequences, then this problem doesn't happen anymore. Coming to the typical workflow, looking at the project itself, when I'm importing my clips, these are typically in CLog 3. So what you can see here is a clip without any modifications. And what I'm doing here, I'm just trying to nest as often as possible just to make the workflow in Premiere Pro better. So I always start with the lowest level, which is the clip. Sometimes I apply the warp stabilizer as here. And in the next level, which is here on top of my project, I apply the color grading using Lumetri. Coming to the color grading process I'm using, it's quite simple and straightforward. I'm using the Cinema Gamut CLog 3 lookup table. That's the standard lookup table which you can download from the Canon website. I applied a lot to the footage. Depending on the shot, I ranged intensity between 75 and 100%. And after that, I go into the fine-tuning of the basic corrections. As you can see here, I adjusted the curves accordingly so that my final result is getting the look I want in terms of exposure and highlights and shadows. What you don't see here right now enabled is an adjustment layer. This layer is actually holding my effects. One is Denoiser 3, which is a plugin from Red Giant, and I typically use that in most of my work to reduce the noise in some clips and also do some sharpening if needed. And in this case, I also have added Magic Bullet Looks, which also comes from Red Giant, to give me the final appearance of my image. And you can see once I'm enabling that. And again, this is working on the 4K files. It takes some time and this is slow. And this is why I have it also on an adjustment layer. And as you can see here, the effect has now been applied. So switching on and off, you can see the difference of that. So basically this looks is just giving me a center weighted appearance with some blurring outside, some vignetting, and some color correction. But I'll leave it off for now because it eats a lot of processing power, and I just enable that before I do the export. So coming to my workflow, as I said already in the previous section, I typically start with lining out my music. As you can see here, down below, I have my 4 tracks of the music, which I have adjusted to the needs. After that, I'm adding all the clips and do the basic edit, and then align typically cuts on beats. As you can see here, I have here an ambient sound track, and here I have multiple layers of sound effects. If we just listen to this sequence here, if I disable the music for now, so you can actually listen to the sound effects only.
To you, today, now.
Add the music to that back again, you can hear the final sequence of that.
Today, now.
So you get the picture how it works. So there's no magic behind that. It's just a simple workflow and the way I do it in my projects. The nesting I'm doing here, as you can see here in this clip, I have done some speed ramping. What you can see here, so I speed up, I slow down, I speed up again. So this clip is an 60 frames recorded clip in 4K, and the original sequence, as you can see here, is scaled down in the time to 40%, which gives me again the 24 frames per second coming from 60 frames. So that's the original speed slowed down, and then in the next layer I'm applying, in this case, a warp stabilizer, nesting that again, and the stabilized slowed down footage is now speed ramped in this nesting sequence here. And then when I come to the final edit, as you can see here, I also apply here a directional blur effect. This lines up with the speed ramping, so I have the maximum blur amount at the beginning. I scale it down, I do some easy in, easy out. I have the clip without any blurring with the 24 frames. Then I'm speeding up again, applying the blur, going out. So that's just a little sequence doing that. Another thing I did in this video is actually for all the sequences where my main character is in the shot, I'm using Cosmo 3, which is another plugin from Red Giant, to actually apply to the skin. And as you can see here, if I activate that, you can see the mask, which is taken from the Cosmo plugin. So trying to concentrate only on the skin parts of it, and all the rest I basically have left at default for this, and this gives quite a nice smoothing of the skin. So if I go a little bit more in detail here, you can see the difference of that with Cosmo activated, and then if I deactivate Cosmo, you can see the difference in the result. So it's a subtle difference, so it's not really much, but it gives a very clean finish to the skin and gives the smoothing effect of any imperfections you might have on the skin, and by doing that the overall look is actually improved. Coming to the After Effects integration, and let me select maybe that shot to show you how that works. So that's the final sequence in Premiere. What you can see here is the number plate is replaced, so that's not the original plate, this was not shot. And what I've done here, I have linked that with an After Effect composition, and I'm going to After Effects so you see actually the clip. In this clip I have made the change to the number plate. If I remove the effect, this is basically the original shot, ungraded, not stabilized, so this is straight out of the camera. And the task is now to replace the number plate with the plate I have created in Photoshop. So looking at the plate itself, it's quite a simple thing. It's a PNG. I created just a PNG file where I've written the word wave 1, and which matches the size of a standard plate here in Germany. And I'm using an effect called Kingpin Tracker. That's another plugin from Red Giant, and this is basically giving me that effect to track a rectangular image to an area in the scene, and it actually uses tracking points which are generated, and for that, typically to make it easier to work for the plugin, I apply a basic LUT in color correction. So it's basically my Cinema Gamut Canon 3 log which I have installed. This is applied to the image to enhance the contrast, to make it easier for the plugin to track. You identify a layer to track, which is the car, and it's adding all the tracking points to my graphics to match the outline of the number plate in every single frame. So once this is done, this plate following the outline of the frame, of course there needs to be some tweaking. The auto tracking is working quite good, but you have to do some manual adjustments. So typically I also track a few points, then I adjust it, and then I continue. So this takes some time. Once you get some practice, you get some good results with that. So once I'm done with the tracking, I disable again the lumetri because I don't want any color correction happening here. I'm working on the CLog footage without any modifications. And if you do that, you can see that the number plate doesn't fit into the image because it's not desaturated. It's not actually working in the CLog style, and this is why I'm adding a curves effect. And the curves effect basically is applying the black and white level so that I get a more flat look of that number plate, because later on in Premiere this is going to be processed with the lookup table and the colors are restored. So I try to have basically matching that to the original scene, as you can see here. I tweak it once I have a good result, I keep it like that. And in this particular case, I also had another effect, camera lens blur, because once the car is moving away a little bit, it's blurred out. So in order to replicate that, I also am applying a camera lens blur to have a better integration into the scene. Typically you can see some grain in the original footage, and if you apply an PNG, it's way too clean, and this is why I'm using Renoiser. That's another plugin from Red Giant to add some noise to the PNG to fit the noise level in the actual scene, because otherwise it would look way too clean when you export that. So With all the steps, I try to create a number plate which is fading in quite good in the original image. This is the final result, and if I disable it and go back to Premiere, you can see that the After Effects integration is working seamlessly. So here you see the original footage. If I go back to After Effects and I apply the number plate and go back to Premiere, you can see that the result is already there. So the next step I typically do is I go on the clip, I do render and replace. This is then rendering that into Premiere with lossless codec, and I don't need to run the online rendering when I do the export. And this is really a time saver, and has also saved me quite a lot when I did the export of crashing, and this actually solved it. Other effects like my particles are coming up here. These are actually not linked projects because they are way too complex, and I want to keep actually the workflow clean. So what I have done, I have created my separate projects for that, and exporting in After Effects a ProRes file and importing the ProRes file into Premiere and working with that. So there's no linkage happening here with these more complicated effects. So these effects are pre-rendered in After Effects and then imported into Premiere, and then I apply the final movements. As you can see here in the motion, I do some zoom in and some panning. So this is all done in Premiere, and this is not done actually in After Effects. I'm not going into more detail on the special effect shots, but if you're interested to learn more about how I did the effects in this video, please leave a comment below and I will see if I can do another tutorial just on the effects itself. The last step before I do the export, as I said, is I enable also my adjustment layer, which is giving me the denoiser and the looks. And then once this is all done and I'm happy with the result, I do the export. In this case, that's a 4K timeline, so I do export it and also in 4K. And then using this output for uploading or also for modifying, going into other formats after that. So that's all for today. Thanks for watching my video, and please forgive me if I'm not on the point all the time, since it's my first YouTube video I have done here. If you have any comments, please feel free to leave it below. You will find a link to the full video wish one up here and a link to other videos I've done down here.